So the topic for tonight is uh, hearing the people in your life is the official topic. And I think this kind of came about a little bit before Thanksgiving. So sort of a little in preparation of the holidays, I wanted to talk a little bit about, really listening, particularly have a little bit of a focus on listening and hearing. Um, because I think that a lot of, um, a practice of sort of mindful listening or mindful hearing, I think can be very helpful in terms of communication, right? Whether communicating with somebody that we're in a relationship with, somebody that is a family member, somebody that is a friend, somebody that is a coworker, someone that is a stranger, and I think that one of the most important things that I've learned in life in general is that a lot of growth in our relationships with people it has to do with our ability to communicate, and that a lot of the real growth or the opportunities for growth come from the more uncomfortable situations, the things that are more painful or that make us feel uncomfortable. And so, the thing is that when we get into a situation with a friend or a family member or whoever, when we start to feel uncomfortable feelings, we tend to have like a little bit of a flight or fight response, right? We tend to want to either, if we're feeling attacked or we're feeling upset or we're feeling uncomfortable, we have a tendency to want to either push that stuff away or to like fight it, or to engage and and the thing about that is that, in order to have communication, I would use like an example of, maybe a situation with somebody that you're close to, where you're having an uncomfortable situation, you're disagreeing about something, and there's a couple things that kind of need to go on, right? The one thing is it's helpful to really be able to identify the feelings that you're feeling, like when you start to feel uncomfortable in a situation, and then you also have to be able to actually be open and receptive to what you're hearing. And the discomfort side of things is, I think, particularly hard, right? Because the moment we start to feel uncomfortable, a lot of times we have these habitual reactions, which are to be, in some cases it could be to get mad at somebody. In some cases it could be to like shut down. I'll give an example of a conversation that I was having with my fiance, and we were talking about a wedding, which I don't know if anybody here is married or has ever had this experience, but weddings planning can be kind of stressful sometimes. I don't know. I don't think I'm the only person who's ever experienced a little bit of tension about planning a big event, particularly a wedding, or four of them in my case. So all to the same person, not to different people. Anyway, we just had a lot of planning. So we're talking about this. We're talking about this wedding stuff, and I realized I'm not feel like I started to get upset, and I kind of had a little bit of an awareness of why I was starting to feel upset. And I was starting to feel upset because I wasn't really feeling like I felt like she was asking me my opinions about stuff, and then I would give my opinion about how I wanted things to be, and then I felt like it was being totally ignored. And, and that started to make me a little bit upset. And, I kind of was like, I was sort of like telling her, I was like, yeah, no, it's fine, whatever you want. It's cool. Like, I want you to be happy, but that continued, and this sort of some of the tensions kind of built up as time went on, and to the point where we started arguing about stuff, and what I realized that part of the problem was that there were two issues in our communication. One was that I wasn't necessarily being fully aware and present with the emotions that I was feeling, right? So I was actually more bothered than I was letting myself articulate or even necessarily being aware of. I was kind of getting bothered, but I was just kind of stuffing it down and being like, oh, whatever, it doesn't matter, we're going to get along. That was one component of it. And then the other component of it was maybe on both of our parts that we weren't really hearing the other person and what they were saying. And I think that there's this is where I kind of want to talk, there's a difference between listening and hearing, right? So we can listen to people and not hear what they're saying, right? We can kind of like, if you've ever been talking to somebody and you're like, you're listening to them and then you start tuning them out, or you're listening to them, but you're not really hearing what they're having to say. And later you realize later that there was some undercurrent or undertone in what they were saying. So it's important for us not to just listen to people, but to actually hear what's being said. And in some cases that could be hearing is you have to hear the tone of the voice. You have to hear the message that is behind the words. You can't just have sort of open ears and be looking in the general direction of the person that you're trying to listen to, right? You kind of have to be present with what is being communicated to you. And I think that if we can have that experience, of actually really communicating, being present with what we're feeling as we're having a conversation, telling somebody something, and being on the other side, being really present in our listening and really hearing, doing more than really listening, hearing what the person that's talking to us is trying to communicate, then we might have the basis for real communication and connection and understanding. And I think, it's funny, I was in high school, I was a student listener. I went to a boarding school, and I was trained as a student listener. And our job as a student listener was to we were trained to do what was called reflective listening. So somebody would talk, somebody who needed to talk about something would come to you to talk, and they would say, and the training was, okay, whatever the person's telling you, you're going to reflect back at them what they're saying. In other words, so if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I was talking to my dad, and he got me really angry because he was like telling me I needed to work harder, and I'm already working really hard, and it was just really upsetting me. And so then your response as a student listener would be like, in reflective listening would be, okay, so you were talking to your dad, and you felt that you were getting upset because he was accusing you of doing something that you felt you were not doing, right? Just a way of kind of rephrasing what was given to you in that sense. And what would happen, especially I think as we're younger, but probably as adults all the time too, is that it didn't actually require, on the part of the listener, it didn't really require a lot of, it didn't require advice on the part of the student listener. It just required being there and listening and sort of letting people know that you were actually, listening by reflecting back what you heard. And I think that is that in and of itself is a great tool, right? Because a lot of times when we're upset about something, we sit down and we need to express it to somebody, and we kind of just need somebody to listen, and be there for us to sound off our ideas and express how we're feeling. And I do think that there's also, when you start to get talk about being in a relationship with somebody, or somebody that you're close to, or somebody you're, a family member particularly, or could be a stranger, there's also can be a component of, well, not only do I have to listen, but I kind of have to hear also what the message is, because it may pertain to me, right? Assuming that it pertains to me in my life, because it's a relationship that we're working on. And so I think that in addition to, the ability to listen to people and hold space for them is, I think, a more modern way of saying that. We also need to hear and understand what's being communicated to us. So what I was thinking that we could do is to do a little exercise of, it's really a communication exercise with a focus really kind of on the listening and on the hearing of what people are saying. And what I want us to do is we're going to split up into groups of 2, and we got enough people, even number of people, so that's good. And we're going to take turns, and one person for 5 minutes is going to speak and tell the other person about a situation that they've had in their lives recently where they had some kind of emotional situation. It doesn't have to be a negative situation. It could be a positive one, or it can be a negative one, a tough situation. I think in some ways those are a little meatier to work with. And for the person who's telling the story, the goal is really just to relate the story of your experience, whatever it was, and to just try and be aware of what telling the story brings up in you, the emotions, the feelings that it brings up, right? So as you tell the story to the person who's listening to you, just try and tell the story and notice the feelings that come up as you tell the story. And for the listener, the goal is for those 5 minutes is to try and be truly present in your listening, to really be mindful of what you're hearing from the person that's telling you the story. Notice when your attention starts to drift, and when it does, bring your attention back to the person that's telling you the story. Now, this is very much like the when we were going through the body scan, and we were like, we're noticing places where there's tension, or we're noticing that our minds are telling us stories and our attention wanders. It's the same thing. We're trying to be aware of when our attention wanders from the person telling us the story, and bringing it back and being, again, just present with whoever's telling us the story. Now, the thing that I know happens to me all the time, and I would guess that it happens to just about everybody once in a while, if not all the time, is that as you're sitting there and listening to somebody speak, you may be really present, and then somebody says something and be like, yeah, I just had that experience in my life. I totally relate. I totally get it. And then either whether you try and say this out loud, or even if you're just doing it in your head, right? You're like, oh yeah, I totally know. Or, and then all of a sudden you may find yourself talking about your own story in your head that this person has just triggered in your mind, right? You're like, yeah. And a lot of times I find myself kind of like getting ready for my turn to speak, right? It's like, oh yeah, I can't wait to relate to the person, and tell them how I understand how they're feeling, or I had a similar experience. And in this case, right, it's really you just kind of starting to tell stories and not be present in your listening. So if you notice that, which I hope you do, I hope I do, just let go of whatever that desire was to like catalog something, write it down so that you can like communicate it later on. Just let it go. Bring your attention back to the person that you're speaking to. And if you missed anything, ask them to repeat what they just said. I just be like, oh, I'm sorry, I got distracted and I missed the last thing you just said. And that's the only thing. I don't communicate your own story. Don't try and relate to the person. Just be open to what they have to say and hear their stories, and try and avoid getting caught up in your own as you do it, and see how that is. Okay, so that makes sense, right? On the one hand, we're talking and trying to about something that feels emotional to us, and be aware of those feelings. And then on the other hand, we are just being mindful of what we're hearing.
So in the end, we have to repeat what the other person is telling us, right?
So actually, no. I think that the goal here is to notice the experience of listening, of being the listener, and to notice the experience of telling something, a story, telling somebody about something that makes you feel emotional, and the experience of just being aware of the emotions as we speak. So the goal is actually not really to we're not trying to fix the story, or we're not trying to fix anything or repeat anything back. We're just trying to notice the experience of trying to truly listen, and to also notice the experience of communicating, not only in words, but also like the feelings that come up as we try to communicate. And then we're going to switch places. So whoever starts talking will then become the listener for the second 5 minutes or so. Okay? And now the only thing is a lot of times I think it's better to actually split up. So we all, like, you guys know each other, we kind of know each other, but I think maybe we could do it so that we're actually working, like maybe you guys maybe you guys could pair up, and maybe you guys could pair up, or maybe you guys pair up, and you guys pair up, and then we'll pair up. How's that? Yeah. I think I know you the least of everybody in the room. So does that sound good?
Yeah, but we need I need a couple of minutes to think about the story I'm
Sure. I mean, it doesn't have to be like anything special. It could be somebody, something that happened today, or, something that I don't know, happened in yesterday, or it doesn't have to be anything big, but you certainly can talk about whatever you feel motivated to move to talk about. Okay. Does that sound good? All right. So let's, sure. Yeah. Maybe pause it, and then we'll get, I don't think you can pause it, so.